All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning to those who are in Europe and good afternoon to those who are in China. Welcome to this EU SME Center webinar that is actually about how to communicate efficiently and how to adapt your strategy to the Chinese market. Today for this webinar we have the pleasure to welcome our experts, Simon Vericel, who is a French and Irish speaker today, and Swiss. So welcome here and thank you for your time. Simon has been here for actually 13 years. He is the founder and the general manager of Influence Matters, which is a PR agency specialized in supporting companies, Chinese companies who want to expand overseas, and foreign companies who want to communicate into the Chinese markets. I will give the floor to Simon, who will start his presentation now. So now it's your turn.
Thank you, Audrey. And thank you all of you for joining the webinar today. It's actually my first EU SME webinar, so I'm a bit excited and nervous. So hopefully you'll find the presentation useful. You know that you can ask questions throughout the webinar, and please do. The team here will be giving me those questions, and I'll try to answer them as much as I can. So as Audrey introduced, I'm going to talk to you today about adapting your communication strategy to China. And I wanted to be very entry level on the way I was going to introduce China and the communication environment of China to you. So looking at the agenda, I'm going to start by letting you know why you should care about China.
I just have to cut you for once because there is a first question actually, which is, are you based? We would like just to know if the audience is based in China or in Europe. So this is the first poll for you guys.
Thank you. So yes, because I did want to know a bit more about our audience today and figure out if you were based in China or out of China to understand if you understood or how much you know about China. Yes, I wanted to start by telling you why you should care about China. You probably have various reasons why you should care about China, but I'll let you know one very specific one. And then I'll introduce why or how different the communication environment is in China from a media, social media, and even language perspective. Introduce a bit of the media landscape, the internet in China, and then a couple ideas on how you should think of approaching the Chinese market. So I already have the response to the first question that we've asked. 76% of you are based in Europe and 24% in China. So I think that the topics under discussion today will fit well with the audience. Let me jump right into why you should care about China. The first thing that you need to know about this is that China is a huge market. Now, you're going to tell me, duh, of course, it is the largest country in the world, but how big is it really? It's, as you all know, 1.4 billion people, with half of that population that's actually living in urban areas. 172 million middle-class households in China. That's 67% of all households in China that are considered middle class. This is a statistics that was given by McKinsey research a couple weeks ago. And this is supposed to grow to something above 250 million within the next 10 years. That means it's a huge market for consumer products in China. There's 1.22 billion, it should say billion, not million, sorry, on the slide, 1.22 billion mobile phone users in China. And that is going to be important to the way you approach communication and social media in China. And we'll explain a bit after why. One staggering statistic that I wanted to share with you, and many of you might not know, is that every year the largest e-commerce website in China, Alibaba, which I'm sure you've all heard of, does a promotion for Singles Day. Singles Day in China is the 11th of November, 1111, hence Singles Day. And it's a 24-hour huge promotion on their online e-commerce platform. In 2014, they sold for 9.3 billion US dollar in goods on the e-commerce platform. That is more than in the US Cyber Monday, Black Friday all the way to Cyber Monday, which is basically a 4-day promotion every year in the US. It is huge. A couple interesting and funny stats about these 9.3 billion is that they actually received 278 million orders in one day on that one platform. 42% of these orders came through mobile devices, which is up from 15% a year earlier. And again, it shows how important targeting mobile users is when you communicate in China. And another interesting thing is that 50,000 people actually bought a car on the e-commerce platform on that day. Imagine you going to your online e-commerce platform, say eBay, and just deciding to buy a car. It's not something that is done very often in Europe, but it's done more and more in China these days. A couple other stats. China is obviously already the largest economy in the world. It has surpassed the US recently. It is the #1 exporting country in the world. It's the largest market for companies like Volkswagen. Interestingly, it's also going to be the smallest recall country after their big PR crisis these days. Mostly because some of you might know that the crisis for Volkswagen is all about their diesel cars, which basically do not exist in China, since the cars in China do not work on diesel. So they'll be mostly safe here. It's the largest market in the world for luxury goods. In 2013, 2014, for example, it was the largest market in the world for Lamborghini and Ferrari. It is not anymore. It went back to the US this year. But it should be China again next year, apparently. And it's still growing at a pretty strong pace. So you're going to read everywhere in the news that China's growth is slowing down, but it's still expected to be about 7% this year, which beats pretty much every country in Europe by quite a margin. Now, it makes sense. China is still not a developing economy. It's still considered a developing country, sorry. But growing at this pace for the next couple of years is going to catch up fast. Do we have any questions so far?
No.
Okay. So moving on to what does that mean for you? Now, the reason why I wanted to go through these statistics is for you to really understand how big China was. Now, if you work in a European SME, which I suppose that most of you do, there is a good chance that you have clients in China, but do you know that you have clients in China? I'll explain to you why I'm making that statement here and asking that question here. Is that recently I've been meeting with a lot of companies that were coming to China for the first time, looking at communicating in China for the first time because they realized that they already had a market in China. And I'll give you two examples. The first one was a company that does user acquisition for mobile games. Just imagine when you play a game on your iPad, your iPhone, you have an ad within the game once in a while. Well, this company provides the platform for this. This company I met in March or April this year, and they were visiting China for the first time because they realized that they were doing more than 20% of their business in China, although they had never opened an office in China. They never did a business trip in China. They never talked to partners in China. But China didn't wait for them. The Chinese, and really there it was app developers or game developers, were trying to expand outside of China, and they figured that their platform to do advertisement within games outside of China was the most interesting one for them, and they started becoming customers. So this company decided that they should be doing communications in China.
So before going ahead, we would like just to ask our attendees whether they have or not clients in China. So it's time for the second poll. So if the answer is yes, just click on the yes, and if the answer is no, of course, click on the no.
I can see the numbers ramping up. It's a close tie for now. Actually, some of the people that are answering no to the question might not know that they actually have customers in China. I'll give you my second example right now, which is actually a much more recent example of a Swiss company that does a gadget for the iPad. Okay, so here the numbers are in 60%.
Yes.
60% say yes, they have customers in China. So yes, that company from Switzerland, which develops an accessory for the iPad and sells it only through its own channel in Europe for now, has never tried to find a distributor in China or never marketed it in China, contacted me a couple weeks ago because they were starting to ship some product to China. So they wanted first to figure out why. Where did those customers come from? How did they know about this product that the company had not marketed in China, necessary and definitely not in Chinese. So they wanted to understand why, and then is there a way for them to actually get more customers in China? So ride that wave and figure out if they could sell more products in China. So we're currently talking to figure out where these customers come from, how they figured out, and once we've understood that, then we can develop a communication strategy for them to holster this pool of potential clients in China without even them opening an office here, because they can ship their product from directly from Switzerland, where they're based. So it's important to know that because the market is so big in China and the internet is so vibrant here, that people will start finding your products, even if you don't import them to China, even if you don't market them to China, and they will start buying and bringing them to China. They will start to talk about it too, and this is where communication becomes important, because if they start talking about your product, then you want to know what they're saying, and you want to be able to drive, at least be part of the conversation at first, but drive the conversation so it fits what you want the customers to know about your products, about your brand in China. So this brings me to the next part of the presentation and more of the meaty part of the presentation, which is showing how different the communication environment in China is. And I'll start with, I will be starting with the language, because this is something that is even more important than you can imagine. On this picture that you see on the screen here, which is actually a picture that I took probably 6-7 years ago on a highway in Gansu province, which is in the middle of China, roughly. And they tried to localize from Chinese to English toll gate sign, and they managed to get 3 out of the 4 4-letter words wrong by doing this. And I'll be talking a lot about localization. The other way around is going to be English or French or German or Spanish localization into Chinese localization a bit in the future. But just to show you how important it is to do serious localization, because the message is going to get lost if you don't. So moving on to the next slide, they speak Chinese. Yes, they do speak Chinese. And that is one of the most important things that you need to know here. And it's a much more important point than you think for a couple reasons. First, you see on the left side different ways to say hello in European languages. And even if you don't speak French or you don't speak Italian, you can read that word. You can actually pronounce it. You might pronounce it a bit differently, a bit bad, with a bad accent. But you can read it, and it's relatively easy to understand what a sentence is going to say when it's a language that is common or close to yours. On the right side, you've got the Chinese word for hello, ni hao. If you have never learned any part of Chinese, you have no idea how to pronounce this. You don't even know that those are 2 different characters and not 4. You do not know what the tones are going to be on these. So it shows that China is just a completely different language market. Another thing that's relatively important is that although this is pronounced in Mandarin, Ni Hao, and the whole of China is going to write Chinese like this, it's going to be pronounced very differently depending on the cities, the provinces where you're going to be. For example, in Shanghai, you're going to pronounce that Nonghao, Ni Hao in Chinese, Nonghao in Shanghainese. Which is relatively close, but in some languages it's going to be very different. So although the writing is the same all over China, speaking is going to demand more localization in the different areas where you're communicating in China. I actually had one example for this that I wanted to share with you, one anecdote that is going to reinforce the reason why you should do serious localization and understand when you speak Chinese, you should speak Chinese. So you should be a real Chinese speaker before you speak to Chinese people. The example comes from a couple of years ago in a relatively serious meeting in between a European company and a Chinese company. The European executive had learned a couple words of Chinese because he wanted to impress their Chinese hosts. And at the moment of signing a contract, he asked for a pen in Chinese. A pen in Chinese, if mispronounced, can be pronounced as the female parts of a body. So asking for a pen, if you pronounce it well, could be asking your host for his female parts. And I have heard many times that since that incident, the company has never really managed to sign good contracts in China. The reason I'm telling you this story, and I've been telling it for a lot of years to a lot of clients here, is that if you do not really master the Chinese language, do not speak Chinese to your host. Go through an interpreter, go to one of your local staff to speak to your Chinese counterpart. Otherwise, you risk making some mistakes that might impact your business in the near or long-term future. Now that we've seen a bit of the language, I wanted to give you a quick introduction to the media landscape in China. And I explained right after that it's changing quite a bit, but just generally some more staggering numbers there. It's a huge media market. You've got more than 3,000 TV channels, and those do not include online-only TV channels. You've got more than 900 radio stations, 7,000 periodicals, so magazines, more than 5,000 newspapers, 2 major news wires. Of course, we can't really count online media. The biggest media centers are obviously the big cities, Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, which we call the tier 1 cities. But tier 2 and tier 3 cities also have a lot of local papers, including some that are edited in the millions, or TV stations that have tens of millions of viewership every day. To those of you who work in some vertical businesses, industrial businesses or semiconductor businesses, for example, there's a very vibrant trade and industry press that's important for B2B communications in China. And those include quite a lot of print publications still. Print publications in China are still more important than they would be in Europe now. There's still an important target when you do communications in China. People still read a lot of the print media. So generally speaking, most of the media is going to be based in Beijing because of recent historical reasons. The media was is still actually under what used to be called the propaganda department in China. The name of the propaganda ministry. Sorry, the ministry's name has changed in recent years. It is now the communications ministry.
More political name.
Sorry?
More political name.
Well, it shows somehow that China is evolving also in media. Again, I'll talk a bit about it in a second. But the media is still very, very close to the government here in China. It has to follow party guidelines in terms of messaging. There's still a very strong censorship in China on what the media can say, whether it's public or private media, because even private media is also being looked after by the government. But you've got some very important local media in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities that when you communicate in China, you should not overlook, and sometimes you should focus on. An example of this was a client of mine a couple of years ago that was opening a new factory in Hangzhou, which is a city relatively close to Shanghai inland, an industrial city, and they wanted to gain local government support and approval for their factory. Well, they focused only on local media, inviting the local TV station, the local couple print media, because they wanted to reach the local communities. By communicating to the global or the pan-China media, they would not have been able to do this. So there are ways to communicate with your audience, even at the local level in China, and you should focus on them when you can. Just a word about the international and regional media in China. Because China is so big and so important, it's home to correspondence from most of the international media organizations around the world. So all the top French newspapers and TV stations, all the top German media or Italian media have an office with often 1 to 2 to 3 people here in the office. Bigger organizations such as the Wall Street Journal, for example, Financial Times are going to have tens of people covering the China market, and they like to hear about foreign companies in the market here in China. And sometimes it's a good way to show success of your company and your products in China to communicate with the international press, so you get some awareness about your activities in China in your home market. And moving on to the next slide, and an idea of how the market is changing in China. The media market is changing in China, and it's changing mostly because of the internet. Before the past couple of years, when the internet made private media and social media available to everybody, the media was completely controlled under the Chinese party, the Chinese Communist Party, that ensured the news consistency with its policy and opinions. Most of the media still is controlled. The traditional media is still controlled, but some of the more new media, online media, have a bit more freedom, although there's still very much, the message is still very much controlled and censored by the government. So there are topics that are off bounds for the media here in China. And those evolve all the time. Everybody knows about them, but for example, you're not going to be able to talk positively about the unrecognized Dalai Lama in China. This shouldn't impact too much company communications, but there are things that you should know when you communicate in China. Media was mostly before consolidated in a couple large media groups. There were just above 10 media groups a couple of years ago that were controlled all of the media in China, and that was all government-run media. Now with the internet, you've got a lot of big private media. Media in China is paid to attend corporate events. And this is something that's actually changing slowly. When I say paid, you don't actually give them a payment to come to the event and report. It's hidden in what is called a media travel allowance. It's a small envelope in which you have, in euro it would be about 50 to 60 euro, which is much more than they need to travel to the event and is in effect a payment. That is an accepted practice under the PR guidelines and the media guidelines in China, but it's shifting very fast because some media are starting to try to follow international ethics guidelines, notably Caixin, which is an economic paper, which was one of the first independent economic and finance papers in China, which was built on European magazine models like The Economist. And they do not accept these payments. Recently, a media as big as Sina, which is one of the largest internet portals in China, stopped accepting these payments to start guaranteeing their independence from corporate news. The media in China is still relatively non-competitive. That's also important because that means that you can put a lot of journalists in the same room. They will not really need an exclusive. This is changing a bit with some of the more prominent media, like the Zeitung I just mentioned. But in general, they prefer to be talking to a spokesperson in group or to go to a press conference because they will be able to share the information that they got after. It's actually an interesting point because if you're in Europe or in North America, you're going to offer exclusive interviews to your spokespeople, to your media. They're only going to want to speak to the media is only going to want to speak to the company if nobody else is doing that. Well, that's not the way it works in China. And they used to not speak English at all. You start seeing some English speaking editors that were Western educated, which is also changing kind of the tone of the coverage to be more balanced towards international too. They're non-confrontational, which means they're not going to be very aggressive when they ask questions, a lot less aggressive than European or American media can be. Questions are usually pre-approved even by the companies before an event. This is kind of changing too, but not so much. My last point here, which is actually very important, they're very patriotic. And this is going to drive the tone of coverage in China quite a lot. If your home country is in the middle of a spat with China, political, diplomatic spat with China, then there is a big chance that the media is not going to look at your company favorably because of the bigger political picture. It happens regularly. It happened a lot during the Beijing Olympic Games, for example, when there were issues with I think it was the torch relay in Paris, where protesters attacked the torch relay to protest against Tibet, I believe, or the China-Tibet situation was in China. And for the next couple of months, French companies had issues in the China market. And this is not going to change anytime soon. Chinese people and the Chinese population and the Chinese country is a very patriotic country, especially now that they are gaining a larger influence in the global political agenda. Chinese people and Chinese media are actually the Chinese media is instructed by the government to play up China's position for its own people. So it's something to be careful about. Something to remember when you're looking at communicating in China is what is happening, what is the bigger picture in between your two countries' relations at this particular time? Is this something that could impact your image, your brand image in the market? So now that we've seen a bit of the media, I wanted to have a quick intro of the internet ecosystem in China. The internet in China, I've called it a bit earlier, a giant intranet. I've called it a giant intranet because you've probably all heard about the censorship in China. It's the Chinese internet is basically cut off from the rest of the world. There are tubes that go in between China and the rest of the world, but they're very, very, very small. So it's very difficult to get access to Western websites when you're in China. But it's a huge internet market. It's more than 600 million internet users, which is more than the European population, almost twice the US population, and this one is all on the internet. It's mostly mobile. I've mentioned that a bit before. In the past couple of years, the Ministry of Communications gets some statistics out about the internet and new internet users. And for the past 3-4 years, roughly 80% of new internet users in China are mobile internet users.
Talking about mobile, you mentioned earlier that it was 1.22 million of
billion.
It was billion.
Yes,
okay,
1.22 billion. Yes, there was a mistake on the slide. It's 1.22 billion mobile phones in China. That was actually in at the end of 2013.
Yeah.
So it's probably a couple hundred million more now.
Probably.
So it's mostly mobile internet, which makes mobile internet platform very important. I mentioned that it was heavily censored. You probably know that websites like Facebook, like Twitter, are censored in China. You might also know that a lot of media websites are censored in China. For example, let me see, the BBC is on and off. CNN is going to be blocked. The website is going to be blocked in China, I believe. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, many others are blocked in China, mostly because the government doesn't want people in China to be able to read the Western views or the negative Western views on China. And rather than just filter the negative, they filter the whole website. Something that's relatively important for you that handle a website that is based out of China, outside of China for your company, is that oftentimes when you have a link to Facebook or Twitter or YouTube on your homepage, which most websites in Europe have for their companies, it is going to break the access to that website in China. A lot of companies, when they can, are actually going to try to build a Chinese website within the borders of China, because it makes it, one, a lot faster to access, and most of the time it's not going to get blocked by unwanted links to social media websites outside of China. Now, because the internet is so big and because all of these social media websites outside China are blocked, there are literally thousands of equivalents of YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, and all the other websites or social media websites that you use in Europe. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I do invite you to make a note about that wheel that I have on the left side of the slide. A social media wheel that was put together by a research and consulting company called CIC earlier this year, and that looks at the different equivalents that you're going to have for each of the European or each of the Western social media platforms. And there's literally hundreds for each. But I did want to focus on one that most of you will have heard of, I hope. I think there was a question for that, no?
Yeah.
And we're going to start with a short question survey that you can answer in right now. And that question is simply, have you heard about WeChat? So I'll give you a minute to answer that question while I have a glass of water.
Thank you very much. WeChat is a very popular application here in China, and I think Simon will go through this, of course. So we are just waiting for your answers, because I think the answer could be really interesting.
I'm seeing the numbers pop up. It's overwhelmingly yes so far, which makes sense because
Yeah, sure.
China is taking over, is going to be taking over the world, I believe. So I'll introduce very briefly WeChat before I go into more details about what users and companies can do on WeChat. But basically, it was built by one of the three largest internet companies in China called Tencent. In 2011, I believe it was launched. It has 600 million active users, with 500 million of those in China. So if you remember the previous slide where we said there was 600 million internet users in China, it means that 500 million out of these 6 million are actually using WeChat. And 1.1 billion registered accounts, and that includes personal user accounts, company accounts, and celebrity accounts. People in China are going to spend an average of 40 minutes a day, and they're going to open the app for 50% of them more than 10 times a day. So 40 minutes a day.
That doesn't surprise me when looking at my own conception.
There's a lot of productivity lost on WeChat, but there's actually a lot of productivity gained on WeChat too. I deal with most of my clients, my Chinese clients, on WeChat by now.
Yeah.
Which poses
it's also
a problem.
A professional network, actually.
It is. It does pose a problem that you don't get a record of conversations after that. And there's there's more than 10 million public accounts, and these public accounts are company or celebrity accounts, and I'll talk very little about it after that. I don't want to give too deep an explanation about it, because I see that 89% of you have heard about it, which is quite a lot, but for the 11% that haven't, I'll give a brief intro. I'll start with what WeChat is for the end user, and that end user is going to be the consumer, it's going to be the worker, it's going to be the engineer, basically anybody who has a mobile or smartphone, which is most of the Chinese population. It's first and foremost a chat application. So people are going to send messages the same way you send a message on WhatsApp, for example, in Europe, or on your
Skype,
Facebook chat,
yeah.
or Skype. Actually, you also have VoIP, so you're going to have video and voice call over the internet to discuss with your friends, your family, and your colleagues. It's also a social network, which works a bit like Facebook, where you're going to be sharing mostly pictures and a comment on your picture. And beyond those 3 points, you get into things that are a lot more interesting, especially for companies, actually. So you get location-based services, which allows companies to actually target users by where they are. But it can also mean users can target each other and find friends that are close to them, or find connections that are close to them based on location and interests. It's a booking platform, and this is the whole couple points later make it look a bit like PayPal, for example. Well, actually a combination of PayPal and e-commerce websites. There is a very strong platform where you can buy plane tickets, you can buy concert tickets, you can also buy products. There are shops inside WeChat. So you can do shopping, payments to companies, but also payments to friends. For example, you go to a restaurant with your friends and you forgot to bring cash. Well, you can just do very quickly in about 3 seconds a transfer to your friend who paid the bill for you. It's as easy as that. Games, of course, and the news browsing. The news browsing is mostly through the social network and news media accounts and company accounts that are going to post information on their official account, which I'll talk about in a second. Basically, for the user, it was put actually by I forget the company she was working for, but a researcher for a big VC in the US recently wrote an article, the best article that was ever written on WeChat. And she mentioned she called WeChat the one app to rule them all. Basically, I call it the internet in your pocket and in one app. Most people do not need other apps when they go on the internet and they use their phone. They open WeChat and they browse the web on WeChat. They talk to their friends on WeChat. They send email directly from within WeChat. They shop in WeChat. They make payments in WeChat. The app is literally has taken over the internet here. Now, it's expanding overseas too at a slow rate. Tencent is still focusing on developing services for the China market, but is starting to look at launching it outside China. Now, since we are here talking to EU SME, next slide, I wanted to just give you a quick overview of what you could be doing as SMEs on WeChat. WeChat can be extremely powerful for companies in general. Now, the bigger the money you can put behind WeChat, the more useful it's going to be. In general, SMEs, and I've worked with quite a few SMEs that were launching some communication platforms in China. You need to focus on just a couple of these functions in WeChat. The main reason you're going to open a WeChat account is to start building a community with your customers in China, whether these customers are actually consumers, if you're a B2C company, or engineers, for example, if you're a B2B company. So the content that you can use, or the function that you should be using, are first the static and interactive content. The static content is, if you look on the picture that you have on your screen now, on the right side, at the bottom there's a small menu with 2 buttons. These 2 buttons work like a website, if you want, a website menu. You're going to click on these buttons and you'll be able to have various options where, as a company, you can put an introduction to your company, you can put an introduction to products, to location, about your brand, for example, and this is going to open a page right in there with that information. The platform is also a news section, or has a news section, which is the most interesting part for you here, is that you will be able to post on a regular basis articles, which could be information about products, which could be information again about your company, or news about the company. Beyond the news distribution service, you will be able to use the platform as a platform to target directly some specific groups of followers. So, for example, if you're a company in education and you'll be able to classify your followers in between their by their activity, so either teachers or students, for example, and you could be able to send an outreach specifically to the teachers only, where only teachers are going to see it and not the students. Customer service is actually pretty used quite a lot by companies in China right now. There's two ways it is done. People can ask questions, and you have either automated responses, so you can build a database of automated responses that are going to be sent back to specific questions, or respond to these questions after a couple minutes.
Just a small, short question regarding QQ, because we also hear a lot of QQ in China.
Yes.
But for me, it was just a chat tool that you can actually use in your company, for example, but also to send emails and receive emails, of course.
So, yes, QQ and WeChat are actually pretty closely linked to each other. First, they were built by the same company. QQ and WeChat both belong to Tencent. QQ is mostly it actually is a social media platform and chat platform and email platform. That's actually in number of users a lot bigger than WeChat. There's something like 800 or 900 million users on WeChat, but it targets mostly young people. So right now, it's mostly high school students that are going to use it, and mostly as an email platform, I believe.
Okay.
And when we talk about company communications, we really look at two main platforms, which are WeChat and Weibo.
Yeah.
Weibo, I'm not talking much about it there because it is kind of
decreasing.
It's becoming less important. I wanted to focus on one of the platforms.
Okay.
So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Continuing with the functions that you can use or that you should be using as an SME, customer service, I was mentioning, your customers will be able to ask questions directly in the platform because it is a chat platform after all, which you'll be able to respond to. You'll get some statistics from your users directly in the platform or in the backend platform. And I've already mentioned about the interactive menu bar at the bottom, which is where you'll get your static content. So this is a very short introduction on WeChat. As I said, I only wanted to talk about this one because we only have an hour and we've already been going for more than 40 minutes. So now...
Just a small question again regarding WeChat. I know that we can use it in Chinese and in English. Do you know if there is any language that are available to use this tool?
I don't have the numbers, but yes, it's available in many
languages already.
I mean, literally many languages. It's probably 30 or 40 upwards number of languages. Wow. So it does exist in French. It does exist. My mother uses it in French.
Wow.
To give you an example. But I know it exists in most European languages, in most Southeast Asian languages too.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so before I go into a couple recommendations, general recommendations on how you should approach the Chinese market, I wanted to give you a word about compliance. When I say compliance, I mean compliance with the regulations in China. Since the government tightly controls pretty much everything that is done in China, there is need for you to know what is going on in the market before you make any type of communications, and I'll explain why in a second. Move on to the next slide. So the main message here is keep your message in order, and keep your message in order, I derived it from the keep your house in order. If your house is not in order in China, you might have message and communications issues in the market. So international companies in China have been singled out many times in the past, by the government and by the public opinion for various reasons. One, because they had a too strong dominant position. Microsoft is a prime example of that. It's having issues regularly because it's still the dominant OS in the Chinese market. Strong technological advantage, and that would be the Qualcomm example. For example, Qualcomm last year was slapped with an almost 1 billion RMB, US dollar fine, because it was found to have a way too dominant position in CDMA and TD-CDMA technologies, which are mobile technologies, which they coincidentally invented, but they had too much of a powerful force in China. So the government tried to cut that down so they could, so it would somehow help the local companies doing that. Faulty products and recalls. A lot of car companies have had issues in the past, and mostly Japanese companies. There are some famous cases of Japanese companies being singled out because, one, they had recalls, but also because the relationship between Japan and China is always a bit complicated. Appearance of not acting for the China greater good. And this goes back to the point I said a bit earlier about the Chinese being very patriotic. If a company is doing business in China, it should appear that it is doing business for China. Any company that is seen as coming to China, selling products and taking the profit away without bringing anything to the economy, to the market, or the China greater good is going to have some issues. A prime example of that is Apple, who has had issues and still has issues recently, but had to change their communication strategy in China to make it a bit more China-loving, if you'd like, so they would have less issues. Now and then, public discontent or rumors that has happened to some supermarket chains. Carrefour, for example, in recent years had issues because they had too many product safety issues in their markets. Political disagreement with a country of origins. I've mentioned that before. If there is an issue in between your country and China, political, economical, it will reflect on the views people have on the company of that particular company. So all that to say that you need to be aware of a couple of things happening in the China market. You need to be aware of your position in the China market. If it's strong, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to show that it is strong, benefiting the Chinese market at the same time. You need to be aware of any type of public discontent or rumors, because these might escalate very fast into a government issue and a probe from the government and longer economic issues or sanctions for your company. So this is all about compliance, which makes compliance really important. So my key learning out of this would be to adapt your message to show support and care for China, and you'll be mostly fine. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, some question. The first one is, could you actually give an example of a successful campaign using social media in China? And if you have like an idea of a rough idea of the budget that could cost to have this kind of strategy.
Well, I mean, the budget question is going to be difficult to answer because,
I guess so, yeah.
Because there is a campaign for every budget, and whether you're Apple or you are a small company based in Switzerland making one iPad, what's it called, one iPad accessory, and selling it to China, your version of success is going to be different, and your budget is going to be very different. You can start doing some campaigns if you have a WeChat account. Building a WeChat account in China can basically be free. If you've got somebody that, you've got an office in China, or you have somebody in your office that is Chinese, that person would be able to open an account for you. Well, provided that you have a business license in China, actually. You need
Which
to,
is not a small issue.
no, which is not a small issue, but I know that a lot of the people listening today do have customers in China. Some might have operations in China, and if you have an operation in China, then you're going to have a business license in China. A business license in China is required to open a company public account on WeChat. But beyond that, it's free. A campaign can cost anywhere from a couple thousand euros to a couple million euros. Some very successful cases, actually one company that you can look into, I don't have the case studies with me here, is Durex, the condom maker, which used social media a lot in the past couple of years to demystify sex in China. And they've been very, very successful in becoming a very trendy brand in the market with games that they have created, games that are mini games in WeChat, for example, or on other social media platforms. So I would invite you to look into Durex, for example, as a very good example of a successful company in China. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes, thank you very much. There is also two more operational questions, actually. The first one is, can we actually send documents via WeChat? And
Absolutely.
if this is possible, how?
Absolutely, you can send documents to anybody
email
on
platform, I
WeChat.
guess.
Yes, like you would. So for those of you who use Skype, for example,
Yeah.
you can just drag and drop your file into your WeChat platform. Now, WeChat is mostly mobile, of course, so you can select your file on your mobile if you've got your Word document, your PDF, or a video even on your computer, on your phone. You'll be able to select it and share it directly through the chat window. WeChat also has a computer backend. Or computer front end, sorry, for users, where when you're in front of a computer, you can actually have your chat version like you have with Skype, for example. And you can drag and drop your files in there, any type of file, as long as it's lower than 30 megabytes, I believe.
Okay.
So yes, you can.
One more question is related to the payment solution that WeChat actually proposed. You mentioned that there were two different companies that enable the payment, if I understand well, or maybe not. So, because you said that there were two different kind of payments on WeChat.
Let me see. The payments on WeChat, I'll go back and explain a bit briefly how it works. You link your account, or individuals can link their WeChat account to bank cards. You can draw money from your bank card to go into your WeChat wallet. Your WeChat wallet is like a PayPal, for example, where you're going to have an account with some money in there. Then you can share this money via different ways. Either you select an amount of money that you're going to share to one of your contacts, or you're going to be scanning a QR code. So I deliberately skipped the QR code because we can speak for hours about QR codes in WeChat. But anyway, QR codes are very important in WeChat, and you can have a QR code that is specific to a product or to an amount. I'll give you a quick example. In our office, there is a company that puts orange juice in a fridge at the entry of the office. And we can just pick orange juice there and pay by scanning a WeChat QR code and pay the 10 RMB or 15 RMB that it costs. It's as simple as that. So it's just very, very simple to pay with WeChat in China. They kind of pioneered the mobile payments in China. It kind of works the same way that the Apple Pay is going to work, or the Samsung Pay is going to work. I believe they just made it very easy to transfer money in between one person and another person, or in between a person and a company. Yes, we can launch the last poll. Okay. I think we'll skip if there's any more questions about WeChat, because we could do a single presentation on WeChat actually soon. But I want to wrap up because we have only a couple minutes left here. So going on to our next slide. So where should you start as an SME that is wanting to communicate in China, that wants to localize your global strategy into China? Just a couple points. First, it's really a summary of what I've said so far. First, you should really keep informed on what is going on in the market. So keep an eye and ears open on what is going on in China, in your industry, on your competitors. Oops. There you go, now you have the slide. So you should keep informed. There are several ways you can do that. I'm sure many of you already do most of these, follow most of these ways. Reading the news a lot. So you're going to read your local and international newspapers. Since they all have a correspondent in China, you'll get all the information that they get from the local environment. Keep an eye out for regulatory issues or regulatory changes around your particular business, your industry, because this might impact any communications that you want to do. And of course, keep an eye for issues in between, or diplomatic issues in between your country and China. An important thing is to not wait for you to be ready for China, because China is already ready for you. Even if you're not communicating about your product in China, chances are your product is being communicated about by users, by people that went to Europe and tried your product, etc., etc. So you can keep an eye out for conversations around your company or your product. And get into the market as soon as possible to actually take ownership of that brand and that message for your market, for your company. Map your audience, and this goes back to how big the market is. You might only need to communicate in that little area around your factory that is in southern China, and your audience might only be there. If you're a smaller company that is entering China, chances are you're going to enter through one sub-market in China, one city, or maybe only the tier 1 cities. We'll map your audience around there so you can tailor your communications to them, and you don't need to waste too much time on people that will not need to know about you. Moving on to the next slide. This is really the most important point. Think local, be local. China is so different from the rest of the world that you have to become Chinese to be understood by your Chinese audience, really. Do it consistently and seriously. Don't find a student in France that is studying French to translate your documents from French to Chinese. You want a professional for everything that you do, because you do not want your message, especially if it's the first time you localize stuff for China, you don't want your message to be mistranslated and misunderstood by your audience, because the first appearance is going to stick. So seek the support of experts. Hire local people as much as you can. So when you move into China, you'll need to work with local people. You can find some very experienced Chinese people, whether they are from China or experts that went back, foreign experts that went back to Europe. Many of those are based in Europe right now. Seek them and work with them so you prepare your entry in the market. And validate your localized brand and message. So if you had to go through that French student or Chinese student in France, make sure you have somebody that is experienced that validates all of that before. So you can test your message with some of your customers in the market, with some of your partners, some of your employees, if you already have employees in China, before you actually publicly communicate. Build local communities. This is going back to using the social media. The social media in China, and especially WeChat, are great ways to create engaging communities around your company or your product, to give them updates, to build a proper following, and have them then communicate your brand in China.
Is there any solution to actually control the communication that could be spread out here in China on your brand or your own products while you're abroad?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
And well, if you allow me to move on to the next stage. I mean, my last two slides, the last two, so we'll be done soon. But this is about being proactive in China.
Okay.
So there's the reactive way, which is what I just talked about right now. Your customers are already talking about you in the market. If you don't have all your strategy ready, then it's going to be difficult to take ownership of your brand. But it's going to help you define your strategy to be listening. Now that you have information about the markets, I would recommend the smaller companies to actually define very specific goals in the marketplace in China, so what they would like to do. A couple examples of goals are here on the slide. It could be driving just awareness in China about a particular product or particular brand. It can be ramping up credibility with product designers, and this would be, for example, a company that makes semiconductor that works with product designers and engineers in Europe and in China, and you want to build your credibility specifically with this group because you want them to know and like your product and believe in your product, so they use it in their designs. Build legitimacy in business and investor circles. This would be more for the smaller companies that are looking for investment, for example, or a partner in China. So your company is a small startup or a smaller startup in Europe. You're looking for a partner to expand into China. Well, you want to be known by only potential partners and investors that will work with you. You can define a strategy that is going to target specifically these people. That to say that you should define your goals very clearly and start acting on some of these goals, because you cannot communicate to the whole China market and to your whole audience in China. It's a huge, huge market, and you won't have the time, the budget, or even the stamina to actually go through all these communication strategies. Moving on to the next slide, very simply what you can do is build a campaign. And here are the elements of a campaign. Once you've got your strategy, you've got your message localized, you know who you want to communicate to, and you know what you want to tell them, well, then you should build your stories, and everything starts with content. This is not only in China, this is the same way you're going to communicate outside China, but here it's always message that are localized. So you're going to be looking for local success stories, for local partnership stories. You're going to be looking for a local flavor to your message, and of course all of that in Chinese, and you're going to turn these stories into compelling pieces of content that you will disseminate to your audience in China. You'll start disseminating that by working with the media. The media is very important in China. You shouldn't do only social media. Social media is still the best way to amplify a message, but you need to get that credible message out, and you're going to get that credible message out through media and other influencers. So you will start building a press bureau that will keep track of who's important as influencers, as media in your market, and target these people directly. Of course, you will need some local people to target them for you, whether it's a local employee or whether it's working with an agency in China. And then when you've got your strategy and your media strategy in place, you will build social media platforms. WeChat is one of them. It's not the only one. You could still look at Weibo. You can also look at Youku, for example, which is the equivalent of YouTube in China. So if you already have a lot of video content in your home country, in Europe, or even in the US, that content can be localized and used for communications in China. You don't necessarily need to create new content for China. You do need to localize it, and I mean localize in a position to translating, because if you only translate, you're going to lose the Chinese audience. Your message is not going to get across so well here, because the codes for communication in China is just different. A very, very simple example of that is, for example, a press release in China is written upside down as it would be in Europe. In Europe, you get the most important facts at the beginning. In China, it's always at the end. So you have to read through a whole press release before you understand what the press release is actually about. It's just the way it works here. So those are just a couple of tips, a couple of pointers of what you can do to start taking ownership of your brand in China. To summarize in a couple words, start by listening, start by understanding what people are saying about you in China. Think of a localization strategy of your global communication strategy, and for that, look at what your goals are going to be in China. Define specific sub-goals. Find out what you want to tell your audience in each of these goals. Localize your message specifically for these. Do not translate, localize. Work with local people for that. Validate your message with local people and your audience. And then create the content that you're going to disseminate through media and social media platforms that you own. Well, media, you don't own them. Social media platforms that you own. And you're good to go. So that sums up my presentation for now. Just a reminder on my last slide, I think I've mentioned it once or twice during the presentation, be local. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon, and thank you to all of you for attending this webinar today. I hope you got a lot of information and some really good tips from this presentation. And I wish you a very nice end of afternoon for those who are in China and a very nice day for the others. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.